Welcome to the Tech Transfer Podcast for BYU. This is Dave Brown. I'm here with Dave Campbell, our Tech Transfer Office Controller, and we're going to talk about some contrarian approaches to commercializing university technology today. There's kind of a standard way that people think of tech commercialization happening at universities, and basically it is an inventor does research, one of our professors researches, they invent something, then they disclose it to the Tech Transfer Office. Our office then handles patenting, markets probably to a major corporation, then does a license deal with that corporation that requires them to pay royalties over a 20-year period, which would be the life of a patent. That's kind of the standard approach. If you were completely unfamiliar with tech transfer and you're laying out a process, that's what it would be. And that's kind of the industry standard. So today we're going to pick apart each of those elements and find some places where probably things happen differently than that and should happen differently than that.
Yeah, this is actually kind of interesting because it's a thought experiment. You're not going to find a lot of people willing to just throw everything in the air and decide to do a little experiment on exactly how this should work or could work.
Yeah, but we need to redesign the industry, redesign the process a little bit. So David and I here have talked off the podcast about doing things in a different order or making the timeline work differently. I have some real world examples of how things don't fit the standard model often. So let's get into it. So the first item on that typical process was disclosure. So the idea is a professor invents something, and then they think, hey, we should do some tech transfer here. So and there's a university policy saying I should disclose this to the tech transfer office. So I'll go do that. How could that not reflect reality or be changed, David? Thoughts?
I think most professors probably have uh, a network of people in their field or even both on the academic side and on the industry side who are interested in broadly interested in the research that's happening at the universities in that particular field. And sometimes that research isn't alive uh, and well because maybe for example, maybe there is a material science gap. Maybe you're doing work that's so into the future that you have to wait for all of these other things to catch up with you before it becomes a reality.
So how does the fact that professors have this network affect the disclosure process?
Well, the disclosure is a formality, and
Right.
a lot of companies and a lot of people in these networks, they don't really operate on formalities. What they're working on is just purely I would think of it as the joy of doing something different, of coming up with new ideas. So in terms of novelty, that's the whole point of the game.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it just feels like if you are connected, if you have a network, then you're going to be connected to those folks who have the novelty as their whole focal point. And I think that creates this opportunity for earlier than disclosure engagement.
Okay. So what I take from that is the idea of having this timeline, the inventor creates something, then discloses it. The fact that it's so rigid and formal, disclosure is a formal process. There's literally a form that you fill out and sign. That makes it inherently artificial. Like that can't really be the moment of invention. This is something that happens afterwards, if it happens at all. And so you're pointing out professors are innovators. They're doing research. They're working with industry, government grants, other parties. And so the heavy work of creating solutions, creating marketable technologies happens before disclosure. And the moment of disclosure is this arbitrary thing. And think also about the fact that professors have a million things to think about. First, they're thinking about their research, but hey, they're teaching classes, they have administrative duties, they have these other things. When they're creating a technology, there are a million things they're thinking about, and tech transfer is one of them. One thing that's weird about the current tech transfer process is that we're putting the burden on professors of disclosing their technologies, and that's why should it be their job? Like they're not the tech transfer person. It
Yeah.
does. One positive aspect of that is it makes it so that the professors who care most about commercialization are the ones who actually disclose.
Yeah.
But there are professors who maybe aren't thinking about tech transfer, but have some opportunities that they could pursue if they only knew. And in practice, I'll give you one example where the normal timeline doesn't work for disclosure. We had just a couple months ago, a commercial party contacted me and said, hey, we're interested in such and such technology.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I've never heard of that. And what happened was there had been a news article about a professor's research talking about this technology. That professor was not familiar with tech transfer, really, didn't think of himself as an inventor, and he was just doing research. but they saw the commercial possibility in it. So they reached out to me. So then I went to the professor and said, there's a commercial party, maybe you should disclose this. And we went through the process. And that's not an isolated case. That happens. And so disclosure doesn't often happen or often happens in a non-traditional way anyway.
The funny thing about that is that you would think that that publication is also one of those checkbox sort of things. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily that the professor um, wants to go through all of these processes. When they do their research, they're probably not thinking, I'm going to publish this research at a specific point in time. It's just something that happens naturally after they're at a certain point in their research.
Hmm.
You would think that, I guess, just because of the formality of the disclosure,
Hmm.
that it would also be sort of a checkbox thing right before publication, just because you want to protect what you're publishing. But
Hmm.
it seems like it would be part of that formality level stuff that's not as interesting as the actual research, but is sort of a have to do it kind of a thing.
Right. And at some universities, they actually treat it just like you're implying there, where part of the publication process is you go through a process with the university to get your publication cleared and submitted. And at that point, you're required to disclose it to the tech transfer
Yeah,
office.
that makes so much sense, and it kind of takes the weight off of professor because it's a step. It's part of their process work that they don't have to think about because as soon as they get there, then they'll deal with it.
Well, here's what I don't like about it though.
Yeah.
Now, tech transfer, if you handle things like that, it seems like you're making tech transfer an extra burden on a professor who's already jumping
Mhm.
through all these hoops to get published.
Right.
Like you've gone back and forth with reviewers and redlined this thing and changed your publication, and now we have to go with another bureaucratic office.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like, right? So um, I've thought about what are alternatives to that, and one alternative would be a tech transfer office. Typically, just like at a company, a university will own the inventions created by professors in most cases. And so the moment of disclosure is a formality, and it's great because it creates a chain of title. But you don't have to wait for that moment to market the technology. Maybe
No.
tech transfer offices should be monitoring publications, marketing the technologies in those publications, watching for patent deadlines, because once something's published, the clock's ticking. You have a 12-month grace period in the US to file a patent application.
Yep.
But doing all of that work without even involving the professor necessarily. And then when you get to a moment where maybe there's a commercial prospect or the technology looks promising and there's a patenting deadline, at that point, the tech transfer office takes the burden of reaching out to the professor to say, hey, let us help you get this disclosure on file.
I love that because it just means that we're fulfilling our technical necessity role
Uh,
without bothering them too much
yeah,
and without impeding their ability to get the actual work done.
right. Yeah, I mean, we want to incentivize more inventing, more, we want to do more of getting published technologies out in the world where they can do good for people. And so a key part of that is like designing the user experience for professors. Let's make it easy for them.
Yeah, and it feels like the provisional patent particularly seems like it could be and maybe should be as low touch as possible.
Right.
Like it really shouldn't be that painful to do that.
Yeah, maybe we circulate things for electronic signatures here, so maybe the professor gets one email where the professor has to electronically sign something to get the provisional on file, and that could be it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so simplifying disclosure. Let's see. Anything else we want to say about that? Anything else? What do we need from a disclosure agreement? So again, this is a bureaucratic form that people fill out. Typically, we ask for some things like describe the technology. How is it different or better than other technologies? Are there prior publications or things we need to be aware of? Are there any parties that could be interested? These sorts of questions. What's the minimal disclosure we could accept from someone? Like, could we simplify that further? Is what I'm saying.
Well, we've talked about a cover sheet type of disclosure, but it's really funny though that you say that. Like when you're talking about the requirements for a disclosure, these are the same kind of questions I would hope that an entrepreneur is coming in to ask
Hmm.
about novelty, particularly. And that's part of the reason why what you said earlier about the disclosure sort of being a little bit maybe ideally late in the game. It kind of makes sense because the
Hmm.
entrepreneur should be getting in as early as possible, which to me means that getting in as early as possible with the professor is kind of a premium product by itself.
Hmm.
It's what you should be wanting to do, because by the time the professor has done all this other work, um, the entrepreneurs maybe I don't know, their power to get to the market, or the power of their idea, or the sort of uh, fresh kind of creativity that
Hmm.
is required to take something to market, maybe a little bit more jaded, or a little bit more um, dampened.
Okay. Well, possibly, but you're making me think of Michael Davis, who a few episodes ago we interviewed him on here, and he's a student entrepreneur. He has customers for his startup company, and what they're doing is providing university invention data to venture capitalists who want to invest in it. But they're not going through tech transfer offices. They're not waiting for the TTO. Instead, they're monitoring publications and delivering those to the VCs. If
Yeah,
you're a smart entrepreneur and you really want to beat out the competition, don't wait till the tech transfer office has it and is already marketing it.
yeah,
Have a relationship with a professor, watch what that professor is doing, and grab technologies early, right?
yeah. And then the counter to that is that when you do that, especially if you're funding research, you have to understand you're funding research, and research isn't like a it's not like a manufacturing line where you have a defined end result. It's an unknown. That's why
Yeah.
it's called research. So
Hmm.
there's a risk associated with getting involved in that. But the potential reward associated with that risk is potentially immense.
Yeah. So you're talking about companies that actually sponsor research,
Yeah,
which most companies that commercialize the technology from tech transfer won't be that. But
true.
if you are that type of company, then yeah, you definitely should have a commercialization plan in place when there's a statement of work for the research before anything's been done.
Right. Right. Because see, if you're engaging these researchers early on, as early as possible, it's possible that you'll see something promising and say, I want to contribute to that to help bring it to the marketplace. At that point, you're funding research essentially.
Hmm. Okay, so we've knocked around disclosures a little bit here,
Yeah.
but the I think a good trend would be to shift more of the responsibility to tech transfer, like even in the disclosure form we were talking about, where the professor is supposed to say what competing technologies are there.
Yeah.
If I'm a professor, I might say, how do I know? I'm not tech transfer. I'm doing my technology. It's kind of
Yeah.
your job to figure out the market.
Yeah, true. And a lot of professors are totally willing to say there isn't one. I mean, happily, that would be the best
Yeah,
scenario. There
because they
isn't a
know.
competing thing. But like I said earlier, it could also be that there is no competition or competing idea because science isn't there yet. Nobody's caught up to it yet.
Right.
And so I think that it kind of goes to some of the other things you were saying about the potential for publications, papers, etc., all this research sort of languishing.
Yeah.
They're not being picked up, not because they're not awesome, but because
Hmm.
people ignored them because they weren't super ready yet
Hmm.
because of other science. They're waiting for other science to be done. But it is sort of an interesting potential that you lose visibility of anything that isn't a fresh publication.
Right. And when people every few years someone in Congress will criticize technology commercialization in the US. They'll say there's all this federal funding going into research. What percentage of it is being commercialized? And the reality is, tech transfer industry, when you look at the actual numbers, does pretty well.
Hmm.
Like we've been around for 40 years and has a huge, we've created, many billions, trillions, I guess, dollars of value. So, those debates always end with tech transfer looking all right. But one gap, what they don't talk about is the gap between publication and tech transfer, things that are never considered for commercialization
Hmm.
because the professors didn't think it was a commercializable idea or because tech transfer didn't pick it up or whatever.
Yeah, or because industry looked at it and thought, well, I don't know how to get that idea into widget form. I don't know how to prototype that, or I don't have enough money to throw at prototyping in any particular time frame that they're worried about. And so they just drop it.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thought on disclosure is that with the AI technologies, other tools coming along, it should be easier for us to monitor publications and provide some of these services to faculty members
Hmm.
uh, way easier than it was a decade ago, at least.
Yeah.
So, okay. So disclosures. Anything else you want to say about disclosures? I think we've
No,
batted around
no,
pretty hard.
I like the idea of sort of taking that responsibility off the professor and sort of making it, I don't know, sneaking it in as simply and quickly as possible just to take care of the formality.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. So let's move on to next topic, which is patenting. So the traditional idea is professor invents, then discloses to tech transfer, and then tech transfer patents the technology. So hire a patent attorney, and they file an application. You wait 2.5 years till it issues, and then now we have a patent. It's time to market it. I've had questions many times from entrepreneurs saying, "Are you allowed to license a patent application or a disclosure that's not a patent application?" And of course, yes, like most of our deals are not issued patents because that takes time. And if you think about it in the tech transfer office, you have an incredible incentive to save money by moving fast and getting things commercialized on the front end.
Hmm.
So, so I guess I've already started attacking the patenting idea. But how can we do patenting differently, David?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the patent again is a bit of a bureaucratic formality. It gives you the ability to create a little bit of a monopoly. I mean, of course, you have
Yeah.
the potential that other ideas that may be different technologies or different, maybe even disruptive technologies that aren't exactly the same and therefore maybe not considered even competitive, but end up being absolute idea squashers where they'll take over huge market share, and so no matter how good your patented idea is, it'll be ignored.
Okay.
But the idea that the patent creates this monopoly for 20 years or 20 plus years is kind of what you're dreaming of, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
to have a monopoly for 20 years. That's
Mm-hmm.
a fantastic opportunity.
And you're
But
saying the monopoly can be illusory because you might have
yeah,
a monopoly on a little slice that doesn't matter,
right.
but sometimes it's great.
Yeah, the patent, I mean, obviously you're hoping that your patent will be written in such a way that it has broad application and broad protection.
How do you know what to patent? Like you get the disclosure, you get maybe an academic paper from a professor. Um, Patents cover invention. So where's the invention? What is it?
Well, I think that actually is a really, really important point to make because a lot of companies, or actually a lot of offices who are creating patents, need to really think that through carefully. There is an opportunity for a licensee to customize a patent as long as the patent is filed in such a way that there's a, what is it called, a continuation.
Yeah, there could be opportunities to add information to some extent, sure.
Yeah, so if you have a technology and you company X want to license it or buy the patent, have an assignment, you could customize that upcoming patent if it's in a continuation form.
So to fill in the blanks there, what you're saying is Tech Transfer Office has filed a patent application, but it's not actually matched to the company's product. So
Right,
now the product has to do something, the company has to do something to fix that.
right, and that's a huge opportunity in many cases. The thing is that patents, if they're not written really broadly, or if they're not written really specifically, can have maybe some disadvantages depending on who you are and what kind of angle you're trying to go with on the particular patent. So having that continuation or having the patent in a continuation form, I don't know how to say that properly, but
Yeah.
you can kind of
I'm
correct
not a
me on.
patent attorney either, so we're just
Okay.
approximating here.
Yeah. But the idea is if you have the opportunity to customize it, that could give you a little bit of leverage or some benefit.
Okay, but you're talking about how to work around the problem. And I'll just state the problem squarely in the traditional model
Yeah.
is Tech Transfer Office gets a technology, and in the traditional model, you're expected to predict what the future product based on that technology will be.
Right.
That is an impossible task. Even the company can't do that. But
Yeah.
you're supposed to predict what industry this will be right for, what the product will look like, and then protect that. So one strategy to deal with that, what we all try to do is get just very broad protection that will cover all kinds of products.
Yes.
But you'll have a couple office actions, you'll go through the process, you'll get narrowed down to some pretty specific claims. And there have been times when our claims were specific in a way that didn't fit the product the company wanted to make.
Yes,
And
exactly.
sometimes you can remedy that in some ways, and sometimes you can't. So what I'm suggesting would be better is you get an invention, immediately license it. Maybe don't even file a patent application. Typically, we would at least file a provisional
Hmm.
application, but license it there, and then the company gets in the driver's seat. They know what they want to create, and they're creating a patent geared to that. Maybe the product succeeds or maybe it doesn't, but at least the patent is a match. It gives them a monopoly they actually want.
Yeah, and that gets back to the idea of the networking idea, where by engaging um, the business community and the academic community and trying to you know build relationships in those two communities, you're hopefully gaining some comprehension of potential market needs
Mm.
and gaining some understanding of what academics are working on. The fitting the two together is totally negotiable. You
Mhm.
know, you could, as long as you haven't laid down your patent with very specific claims, you might find that the market has an application that the academic never thought of.
Yeah, and also, so we're talking about the fit to the product, fitting
Hmm.
the patent to the product, but then different licensees, different commercial partners want patents for different reasons. For a certain product, a startup company could conceivably file a patent application not because patent application is important to them. Maybe maybe they're running a SaaS business and the patent isn't even that relevant. Like no one's ever going to see their invention anyway.
Hmm.
Um, but they might want a patent just to raise money on. So in that
Yeah.
situation, maybe they just want as broadly a broad a patent as they can, and they want it to be issued. Where another company, um, it might be very important to a commercial buyer that you don't have a patent. Like they
Hmm.
might not want anyone to see how they do what they do. So patent strategy needs to be catered to the ultimate commercialization opportunity, and that could be anywhere across the board.
Yeah, that's really important, actually. So I kind of think you're pushing into the territory of the trade secret.
Hmm.
It is kind of funny that the standard operating procedure, where you have an idea, you create a provisional patent, or sorry, you disclose it, you start the patenting effort, and then you have a patent, and then it's like one of those 1950s how-to
Right.
movies that they used to produce, and then the person goes home and is very proud, and the wife's very proud, and all that stuff. But
Yeah. It's like Tech Transfer 101. It's just a very basic approach.
right, and then you have to realize though that maybe the patent is a bad idea, and maybe what you
Right.
should be doing is a trade secret, or
Now, I should
maybe.
say in academia, trade secrets are often not possible because we're going to publish regardless.
Mhm.
But in some situations, they might be possible. Yeah.
Yeah, or I think the other thing though that catches me in terms of thinking about this is that when you create a patent, you've gone probably a little too far ahead you're making assumptions about what the market wants already.
Right.
And the academics, sometimes they've got ideas already specifically in mind,
Uh,
but sometimes the business people will come in and say, "Oh, no, no, no. If you just tweak it this way, we can run with it in the market."
right. And so if you're an academic researcher, it's easy. So there are two systems, like academic publication and patenting are actually quite different. Um, in the way, this is just an analogy, in the way that like plagiarism and copyright protection are different.
Mm.
Like they're different concepts that look similar. And so what you want to patent might be very different than what you want to put in an academic paper.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the ability to raise funds is a particular business obsession, I guess. But the funny thing is
Mhm.
that writing grant proposals is kind of a similar
Yeah,
deal.
pretty analogous.
You're both looking for funding. Why would it be that you could get massive amounts of grant funding for research, but then you can't get any funding to take something to market? So I think
Right.
there's some interesting parallels there that again require the communities to get a little more networked and be
Hmm.
a little more engaged with each other prior to the patent process.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think our takeaways for patenting are there are a lot of things that should happen before patenting happens. Sometimes patenting maybe shouldn't happen, but at a minimum, it should be geared towards the commercial opportunity.
Yeah, and I also think it's an interesting idea that in the checkbox sort of mentality
Mhm.
that we're going to go patent stuff like crazy. We're going to go all over the world and patent this idea
Right.
all over the world because we think that we're going to sell all over the world or we're going to protect this thing all over the world.
Hmm.
Different people have different reasons for wanting a patent. Sometimes it's because it gives them, I don't know, a certain
Well,
status
yeah, it
that
could be
helps them
that.
raise money,
Yeah.
or it gives them, or literally maybe they're thinking, yeah, this actually this gives us the ability to go protect these ideas, meaning that they're going to use an offensive or defensive strategy and have the money to back that up.
Hmm.
But most startups don't have that money.
Right.
So buying a patent or licensing a patent doesn't necessarily protect them from anything unless they have the money to use to back that up.
Right. And patent cost, if you've, as a tech transfer office, if you've invested heavily in a patent and then you license or assign that to a startup company, that patent cost is a pretty big burden for them. So you don't want to have done that unless it was really worth doing. And I should also mention that you make me think that tech transfer in its early days, in the 80s, was all about not losing value. Companies or universities began to think, oh my goodness, we've had all this valuable stuff leaving the university and we didn't get the money. Let's do that. And so there was this mentality, I think, in the early days where we need a patent everywhere. We need to protect our stuff so no one can take our stuff.
Hmm.
But that's kind of a reflexive, greedy, irrational position.
Yeah.
It makes sense to start there. But again, that's tech transfer 101. I think as an industry we've evolved to where we see no, it's not a matter of hanging on to your stuff. It's a matter of creating new value, creating new opportunities. So we're going to take these technologies, then we have to do something with them to make something that provides value to people in the marketplace. That might involve patenting, maybe not, but it definitely does not involve the university investing in patents all over the world. That's crazy.
Right. And that's the funny thing is that if you say, look, I need a patent to go help me raise money in the industry, okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
But if you say I need a patent protection on my cool little niche cell phone technology, then
mm,
I'm immediately going to say, well, that's going to be interesting because that particular industry is really tough patent
yeah,
wise, and that's why you've got to have funding to go back up your claim, back up your
absolutely.
patent if you're in that kind of a world. And sometimes that it's predictable. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that particular industry is rough in terms
Yeah.
of patent protection. Um, and so,
But what you're saying, I think, is just we need to get away from the assembly line view that we're stamping out a patent here and whatever comes down the
yeah,
line and actually have a strategy.
yeah, that's right. And I don't, sometimes that strategy is difficult to define.
Yes.
It's really hard for me to, I mean, from a cost perspective, it's easy for me to say, well, provisional patent's easy. It's very cheap. It's
Yeah.
$150 or whatever.
Yeah. 120, I
And
think.
then the question is, what do I do in that year that that provisional patent gives to me? I could do all kinds of things,
Hmm.
but in that year, maybe the best thing to do is figure out if the market cares
Right.
and figure out if we ought to be um,
Well,
patenting this after all with
and
a
that's why
full
we
patent.
have. So a previous episode with Katie was about Katie Hunter was about validating technologies. We have a validation team here that does that very quickly on the front end after a disclosure,
Mhm.
so we can see whether there's actually a need for technology in the market.
Yeah, patentability and marketability are two critical things to take care of in that year that the provisional patent
Well, and
gives
we're moving
you.
to marketability next year in a
Oh,
second.
perfect. So then
Well, can I set up
yeah,
the
yeah,
assembly line?
please.
So the assembly line view would be professor invents and discloses tech transfer patents. Now tech transfer is marketing, which means calling C-suite executives in major corporations. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, if you decided to do the checkbox thing that was common in the 80s, then you'd say, well, we're going to sell our product all over Europe. We're going to sell our product in the North America, and so that's where we're definitely going to do patents. And then we might decide that we want to manufacture. We want patent protection in places where we would manufacture.
Hmm.
Well, that's changed significantly over the last 40 years
Hmm.
as we've seen low labor cost kind of markets be really the places where you want to manufacture
Hmm.
to, you know, keep your
So you're
margins
manufacturing in
happy.
Asia or wherever.
You
Yeah.
manufacture in China, or you manufacture maybe in Mexico or something.
And then how's that changed marketing?
Well, it's interesting because now if you said, well, we need a patent strategy checkbox kind of mentality,
Hmm.
it's so easy to balloon your patent costs by saying, well, we got a patent everywhere, everywhere we
Oh,
manufacture or might manufacture because we have to be agile these days, and everywhere we're going to sell. and that's just not good strategy.
Yeah.
From a cost perspective, I really like the idea of just doing the provisional or just doing the PCT and then taking all the time I need to or want, I guess,
Hmm.
to figure out patentability and marketability and then making some decisions because I don't want the university to become a line of credit by having us pay for all of these legal costs and then having to guess whether or not we're going to have a licensee come in and want to reimburse those costs.
Right.
But also that might lead me to do something stupid by just saying, we're just going to do a provisional patent in the US and then a patent in the US and that's it. That might not be the right strategy either.
Yeah. It often is, but yeah. So I think in to wrap up the patenting discussion, then the corporations understand that speed to market matters. Like that's serious money. If you can get to the market 6 months earlier, you got 6 months of peak revenue that you didn't have otherwise. It reduces the risk in all kinds of ways. And for tech transfer, we need to realize, at least on the patenting front, speed to market makes a huge difference for us. If we license earlier, we're reducing the burden not just for us, but for a startup company that we license to, and all the other parties investing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, plus there might be some other strategies, and we'll probably get into that in a couple minutes on the marketing side, but there might be some strategies that we would change, patent strategies we would change if we knew that the market size was very small,
mhm.
but we could offer a very good high price, high margin product.
Sure.
Whereas if you knew the margin was not going to be um, a problem. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just different if you said we got to go mass market, then okay, maybe you have a more intense patent strategy. If you're going to
Well,
do
definitely.
small market, then maybe you don't care so much.
Yeah, I mean, so the insight you're offering there is that you might be willing to invest more in a patent if you think the opportunity is bigger.
Yeah,
It's just very hard to predict.
yeah,
So, okay, well, so let's talk about marketing. So again, the traditional thing, you've gotten your patent, now you're going to market, and like I say, um, the 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 obvious solution for someone with little experience in the industry would be, well, start calling those major companies, like call Google, see if they want it, or whatever, you
yeah.
know. And so, for marketing, how can we do marketing differently than the traditional approach?
Well, a long time ago, I uh, I was working for a company that started to use value-added resellers.
Hmm.
When they did that, they didn't really realize what they were doing. They just thought, well, maybe this is a better way than to create our own
Okay, and define
offices.
value-added resellers for us.
Well, if you have a small company, in the case I was in, you have a small company who wants to get the word out that we have a cool product.
Uh-huh.
And so they basically used a value-added reseller model, which was to let the value-added reseller go into a particular location or a particular market and amplify your signal and say, hey, this company over here has a really cool thing. It's a small company, and that's why we're here to help them get the word out.
So the value they're adding is marketing. They're going to take the manufacturer's product. You're the manufacturer. They're going to buy from you, and then they're going to make it look nice and talk about it a lot and get it out there.
Yeah, but the thing that we missed was that the small company I was with missed was that the value-added reseller also has, if they're good, they have this vision that they can also provide amplification of what the market wants back to you.
Hmm.
That's immensely valuable.
Hmm.
And so ideally, from a marketing perspective, it would be a two-way conversation, and you would leverage people who know the market, and you would leverage people who know the manufacturing or
Uh-huh.
the original production side of the product or service. So it has to be a two-way street, and you're looking for ways that make your network more viable and more lively.
Yeah.
If you can buy conversation, it's probably going to be worth it to some degree.
Okay, so you're saying take some feedback from industry. I've seen
Hmm.
several things we've done on campus here recently at BYU where we've had meetings with industry people to find out. For professors, it's valuable to identify new lines of research that will improve things for people, especially think of like medical situations. Why not talk to some doctors and find out what problems surgeons are having and things like this?
Yeah,
So get feedback from that. Increasingly, I'm sure it's still a minority of research funding at pretty much every university, but increasingly we get more commercial funding. There's been at our industry conferences, they've talked about how pharmaceutical companies are increasingly looking to universities to discover new drugs,
yeah,
like pushing R&D out of the company and into academic institutions.
yep,
There are a lot of economic reasons for them to do that. but they can't be alone. Probably every company is doing that at some level. We definitely get, some great commercial funding here. So when professors are working with commercial partners, the marketing could be done up front before they even do inventing.
Yeah,
We might already know who this technology could go to.
exactly. We know who it could go to, and not only that, but it changes the way we think about the economics of it. We're willing to have a lower reward because the risk is so low.
Yeah. So think what this does to the timeline. So you have a commercial partner like that. The traditional tech transfer timeline's gone. What's happening now is a professor is talking to a commercial company. They see that as research funding, which it is, but it's also marketing. And so we've done our marketing, and then they're going to do the research, and then disclose the tech transfer, and then do a deal, and then company patents.
Yeah, it is really interesting too that sometimes when you get small businesses that come to the university, they really don't want to participate in the research. They know that research can be risky. They know that they may have some budget questions. But it is
Yeah.
interesting that when you get industries who definitely want to transition the research dollars to the university and
Hmm.
stop doing the research on their own, it really does speak to a couple of things. One is the idea that they know they're going to have to spend the money one way or the other.
Right.
So why not help the academic institution do it straight off, right from the get-go, rather
Hmm.
than them doing it later.
Hmm.
And the other interesting thing about it is that I think they feel like it's lower risk because they're engaging very early on, and they'll know before a lot of money is spent whether they need to turn off
Right.
that faucet.
Well, and there's more, and maybe you imply this too. In a future episode, I'll interview someone from the Research Administration Office here and get their take on it.
Hmm.
But it seems to me that for a variety of reasons that I won't go into right now, I think BOU provides incredibly great bang for the buck on research dollars.
Yeah.
I think your corporate R&D dollars go further if they're at a university, definitely this university, because of the way overhead and equipment is provided, because of the way the professors use the money, and because you have PhD students working for pretty minimal salaries and doing some pretty great work. So
Yeah.
if corporations are doing it, it's rational to do.
Yeah.
And then there's also, if you're a corporation, there's maybe a PR bump. Like people like when you put some money in their university.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, for all kinds of reasons, it makes sense to have those corporate partners. Most technologies that we get at a university still are not coming out of those arrangements, but when they do, the marketing maybe has already been done.
Hmm.
There are times when a company sponsors research and then doesn't license it. So now we're looking for someone else who might be interested. That can happen.
Yep.
But yeah, marketing could happen up front. Let's think how else we could move this around. I'd put out the standard situation where you're calling major corporations to license the technology.
Yeah. The cold
When you
call.
do that, yes, the cold call to Big Co. When you do that, it is really hard to get to the right person. Sometimes it can work. I'm not saying don't do it, but often you get to the right person at Megacorp and they say, "Oh, we've got to have this technology. It's
Hmm.
perfect for us." And you say, "Great, let's sign the papers." And then they say, "Oh no, we can't take a risk on a raw technology. You need to get a startup company to succeed with that first, and then we'll acquire the startup company." And I've literally had that discussion with companies and said, "Okay, I can't guarantee our startup company will want to be acquired by you. They might want to be acquired by your competitor." And what they'll say is, "That's a risk we can take, but the risk of investing in a raw technology is not something we can take."
I
And you can
love
see
that.
how, yeah, well, this is, there's literature about how you create innovation in corporations. Why are startup companies so much more innovative than large corporations? There are all kinds of bureaucratic institutional reasons, risk taking, having shareholders, and these sorts of things. So the corporations are not crazy to take that position. There are some good reasons for it, but it's just the reality we work with. So it's usually much easier to license to smaller companies. And then if you have federal funding, or just generally, if you're in a tech transfer office today, I think you have an incentive to license to startup companies.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also that one of the, we've talked about bridging funds in the past, but the idea that um, you're trying to fund uh, technology development in places where traditionally it's not the funding is just not there. You have funding at
Yeah,
the research side, you have funding at the corporate marketing and sort of manufacturing side, but in between you don't have funding for proof of concept, validation, prototyping. That funding is a little more scarce. So that's an
yeah.
interesting that's an interesting set of choices that we can see the corporations are not necessarily willing to dive into, and yet you still see a lot of funding in that early research side.
Yeah. So, right, there are certain things like I think for drug discovery, for definitely for software, um, you can get research funding and then they're ready to go. The companies are ready to license the technologies. But for something a little more complex like engineering devices or a medical device would be a great example.
Hmm.
You have a basic research that, look, we should be able to create a device that does X, and then they'll say, okay, well, tell us when you've created it. But
Yeah.
actually, engineering, especially if you're something like maybe you're a microbiologist or something, you haven't created devices. You're doing the basic research behind it.
Hmm.
Now somehow you need to get funding and expertise to actually create a prototype or just get it close enough to market where a company will take it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where funding is really lacking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, well, to your point,
Oh,
totally agree.
so then the other thing that actually comes to mind is when you when you have this brilliant idea and you're waiting for the material science to catch up so you can actually implement it. It is an interesting thing because the patent time clock is still ticking.
Right.
And I know if you want to have that 20 plus year monopoly, you really want that patent time to stop or slow down. And that
Hmm.
may be, there's some tension in why you would want to deal with the patent timing or to continue to file or to continue to file continuations, so that you're not getting that timeline started until you absolutely have to.
Okay, and so the way I take that insight is that again, the traditional model that we're trying to rip up here, where it's four consecutive actions, has you do your patenting and then you do your marketing, but that can't be reality. These are parallel processes.
Yeah,
Like you should be marketing and patenting at the same time. You should be inventing, patenting, and marketing at the same time.
yeah,
And so it's really artificial to have this checklist or workflow where they're in sequence.
yeah. And hopefully, again, back to the networking thing. Hopefully, your network is capable of doing those things in parallel.
Hmm. And it's not the alternative to a straight line traditional view of tech transfer isn't complete chaos. It's just recognizing there are, 35 different flows you could go through to get a technology to market,
Right.
and you have to be able to do all of them and kind of have an idea of how to.
So we've kind of breached one of the topics that sort of makes sense right now to talk about. Well, I'll let you be the judge
Which
of
is
that,
what,
but
yeah.
it just strikes me that there are different ways to acquire technology.
Hmm.
You can do licensing, but you could also buy a patent
Right.
and or what we would call an assignment, where we're assigning the ownership, the rights, etc., to the interested party, corporation, whatever.
Okay. Let's move on to that topic. So our fourth topic, probably last topic, is deal structure.
Hmm.
And so the traditional deal structures, I put it out there, was an exclusive license agreement where you have a licensee for 20 years and they're paying you a royalty. You're paying the patent cost, then they reimburse you for that, and then hopefully they pay you a royalty.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, we we have professors who like royalties. It's nice to have a little bump every year or every quarter, but it's also sort of a, a bit of a game because you could say, look, I don't need a bump immediately, but I would like to see something out of this in the future. And obviously, you have the time value of money, kind of creating some incentive there. But but it is sort of an interesting opportunity to actually sell off a technology. The company particularly seems intrigued by this idea because now it's an asset.
Okay, so two separate things there then.
Yeah,
One is let's you're talking about attacking royalties and attacking the license versus sell
yeah,
economy. So royalties,
yeah.
I was
We've heard recently that VCs and other people providing funding for companies, they don't necessarily like royalties.
right.
I didn't really think about that before. I kind of just thought that royalties were just standard operating procedure, no big deal. But apparently, people who provide funding don't love
Well, yeah, so
royalties.
So people funding on the front end, and then acquirers never want to pay a royalty either. So you end up in this separate negotiation when
Right.
acquisition happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm doing a deal that we're signing maybe today where it's a repeat entrepreneur, someone who's succeeded with one of our technologies, exited, and is back for another one. And he said, look, with the last technology, it was, an analogous technology to this new one. And we had this burden of paying royalties to BYU. And so we always had to do this calculation. And the royalties never amounted to much. We weren't making much money. It was all about the exit for us.
Yeah.
And so in this case, can we just forego the royalty and just give you a larger percent of exit instead? And for a variety of reasons, that made sense here. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it makes sense in many ways. An exit doesn't mess with your cap table. An exit gets rid of the royalties potentially, depending on how you structure the deal. And so there's some potential benefits there that make the company's financial statements look pretty good.
The risk is, what if they never exit?
Yeah, exactly.
Then,
Yeah,
then you get nothing out of it. That
yeah.
could be upsetting.
And you could still do some combination of things. You could still do royalty payments or stuff with that. But the real point of the exit, the real point of owning the patent, we'll get that to that in a second,
Hmm.
is that it also makes your financial statements look better.
Hmm.
But the real point of having the no royalty deal is because raising funds apparently is easier.
Yeah, and then, like I say, where it's become an issue for me before is when a company exits, happens every time. The acquirer will want to meet with you and somehow get rid of the royalty,
Yeah.
and they usually don't want to pay a lot to get rid of the royalty. They'll tell you you're holding up the exit and so on.
Hmm.
Anyway, and we've worked out deals in good ways, but I think royalties are largely illusory. People, you have this dream that, okay, we'll be getting $1 million a year from this company for the next 20 years. That'll be fantastic. First of all, a dollar 20 years from now isn't worth that much in today's dollars.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't get too excited. But then, secondly, it probably won't happen like that. If a company gets to a point where they need to pay you $1 million a year, they're going to try to negotiate their way out of that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, royalties come in a couple different flavors. I mean, one is that royalties, sort of by definition, are based on percent of sales.
Hmm.
You would think when a company gets to the point in their business where they're actually able to pay the royalty as a percent of sales, that's a pretty good deal because
Yeah.
you're not having this huge expense without related revenue.
Hmm.
So that's pretty cool. But the problem with it is that lots of deals are often written with minimum royalties baked into the deal as well, which is intended to be an incentive to get the company to take the product to market so that they have the revenue and the expense together.
So if anyone doesn't know, minimum royalties would work. Say you're paying a 5% royalty and you're saying, okay, by this year our sales should be $1 million, so we should be paying 50,000. We'll have a minimum royalty of like 25,000, and that'll incentivize us to at least do a good job commercializing.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but sometimes what you see is that that min royalty is even more illusory because the minimum royalty, um,
How will they pay it if they're not making their sales?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How are they going to pay it? And so what you end up with is companies who are struggling with cash flow. They don't have the money to pay them in royalty. They're embarrassed. They don't like the situation, and all the communication with the tech transfer office stops.
Yeah.
That is like our worst scenario.
Yeah, you don't want to set someone up for that.
Yeah, we don't want to set them up for that. Our whole goal is to help them be successful. And so we have to be able to look at that as an opportunity to re-engage, communicate with communication with the licensee and talk to them about what the reality is, because we
Hmm.
want our deals to reflect the reality. If they're cash poor, what can we do to help them overcome that situation, get to market, and start producing benefit
Yeah.
to both of us?
And to be clear, we're not completely anti-royalty. Like most of
No.
our deals have a royalty component. It's for many professors, for many inventors, it's nice to have like an occasional payment coming in,
Yep.
even if it's not huge. It's just you have to balance that with the fact that it's a burden and it'll probably not go quite the way you set it out. So the second issue you raised was outright sales. And I'll preface this by saying many university tech transfers, the transfer offices will not be able to sell technologies outright. If you're a state school, my understanding is you typically can't. Or if you have federal funding for a technology, you can't sell a technology outright unless the agency gives you permission. We've gotten permission a couple times from agencies, but it's taken a long time to get. So that's hard. BYU, because we're a private university, is a little unique in that way, where many of our technologies, if they're funded by the university or by private dollars otherwise, then we can sell them outright. And there are some great reasons to do that.
Yeah, so the one of the main reasons is you have an asset.
Yeah, the
The
startup has it.
the startup has
Yeah.
the asset, and when you have that asset, it's on your books as an asset, and that can be a really good looking um, thing on your financials. And when you combine that with some of the earlier things we talked about, like doing a deal with an exit instead of doing a deal that where you give the university some common stock or something, the exit doesn't mess around with the cap table, whereas the
Hmm.
stock would. So there are ways you can fine tune your financial statements to look better for raising funds, etc. But in terms of owning the patents or the portfolio outright, that's kind of a cool thing with a little bit of a caveat, and that is that usually when you're owning something, you're paying for it. So
Hmm.
if you
Right.
know that just right from the get-go that the patent is going to cost to get something patented, it's going to cost, I don't know, $6,000 to $12,000,
Hmm.
and then you're going to pay maintenance costs on that patent over the life, which could cost anywhere from 20K. I recently saw a figure online that said anywhere from 20K to 60K over the life. So if you
Yeah. Depends if
assume
you
the
hire, but
life is
sure.
20 years, then you're paying 20 to 60K for over that 20 years.
But the company's making the decision now.
Yes, the company is fully engaged in deciding whether they want to keep it, abandon it. They're completely in charge of the strategy in terms of patenting strategy, and they're also more able to dictate how they want to customize the patents in and the technology for that matter.
And what I like about that is that they're incentivized to be rational. They're running a business. Whatever patenting they do is going to have some strategy behind it,
Yeah,
and avoids the kind of moral hazard or the misaligned incentives in licensing. If you do a 20-year license agreement with someone, if a startup company falls on hard times, will they throttle down patenting? Not necessarily. Like if the university is fronting the cost for patenting, they might want to up the patenting to make it easier for them to raise money so they can stay alive,
yeah,
and which digs a deeper hole for the university and maybe makes the startup, unless things go really well, could make it harder for them to survive as well.
yeah.
So it's just better to have the decisions. It's Nassim Taleb, his book. He has one of his best books is Skin in the Game, and he talks about how people who are making the decisions should also bear the consequences for the decisions. Try to align incentives that way. Give the startup the ability to do patenting because it's the one who's really going to live or die based on that.
Yeah, the one of the things that we didn't talk about earlier that I kind of wanted to is sort of a little bit relative to this as well, and that is that when you're dealing with all of these things as a startup, you may not have the same vision or visibility that a large company has. So, as a small time investor, um, I used to really wonder how I could participate in a market that was I just could not figure out how it all worked. But when I went to business school, they threw around some terminology that I really thought was really helpful. And a couple of those terms are asymmetric information,
Hmm.
which we kind of touched on earlier. And the other one that's related
And
is
the asymmetry we touched on is the commercial partner knows things we don't.
right.
Inevitably, even if we talk all day long, they know things we don't.
Yes. And it's because they've got that really strong network. They know
Hmm.
what the market wants. They know what the business side looks like, the costs involved, the overhead, all that stuff. And because of that, they know things that maybe a smaller company just can't possibly imagine.
Hmm.
But I do think there's an opportunity as a small company to gain some advantage because small companies can be agile. Big companies
Right.
rarely have that opportunity.
Hmm.
So there is some potential there to have asymmetric information and be much more agile as a small licensee. The other one is efficient markets, but the assumption there is that if you see an opportunity, well, the standard business school
Hmm.
example was if you see this is the joke. If you see $20 on the ground, should you pick it up?
No,
No,
because someone else has already
because
picked it up.
someone else has already picked it up.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so that's
So
the joke. But the idea is that by the time you realize that 20 bucks is theirs, lots and lots of other people in the market already knew
yeah,
that. But aside from the really horrible joke that
yeah,
is,
that's pretty good.
the the idea is really clear though that there is such a thing as an efficient market, there is such a thing as asymmetric information, and both of those things yield potential ways to address those problems as a small company and as a large company. Those are very different matters for each of those entities. But also in the early adoption or early injecting yourself or your company into the process of development.
Hmm.
So the earlier you can put yourself in front of the professor or the product, the research, that's going to be better for you to help you create that asymmetric information or that efficient market for your benefit rather than someone else's benefit.
Okay, absolutely agree. And so here's where I think we might end up a little bit. So the traditional approach that we're trying to rip up here is professor does research, invents, discloses, then there's patenting, then there's marketing, then there's licensing.
Yeah,
And some of those steps, it wouldn't even have to be licensing. We would change that to assignment if we can. But the process could go more like this. Marketing occurs when the professor is interacting with a commercial research sponsor. Then there's some invention. Then that's disclosed to tech transfer. Then it's licensed or assigned to the company, which then does the patenting.
yeah,
So the order is scrambled completely.
absolutely.
Yeah. And we need to be willing to do that. And that's just one sequence. You can do it in a number of different sequences. The point is the straight line version is just too simple for the complexity of commercial transactions we do. Most of our deals, I bet, don't follow the traditional four-step process there.
Yeah, and I think a couple of takeaways from this can be really, really simple.
Mhm.
One of them is start a conversation with your local tech transfer. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, but the truth is that all of these deals are prefaced with conversations.
Hmm.
All of the research funding is prefaced by conversation.
Hmm.
So talk to your professor, talk to the professors, talk to the tech transfer group, look for ideas. People who are good entrepreneurs are always in here, always chatting, always trying to figure out
Right.
what latest technologies is going on, what the research looks like. They're chatting with professors. They're in early, and
Hmm.
they're anxious to know things
Hmm.
that are not commonly known. So
Yeah.
I think that's an easy takeaway from this conversation.
Yeah. So a poor approach to licensing for tech transfer for an entrepreneur would be to go to the university's tech transfer website, look through the technologies, maybe find one, and if you do, then call the tech transfer office.
Yep.
It'd be much better to strike up a relationship with a professor who does research in an area you like, or just come in person and talk to the tech transfer people, get to know them, ask what's not on your website,
Right.
and pick through the opportunities that other people aren't looking at.
Yeah, just like your favorite restaurant, there are off menu items.
Absolutely.
And the funny thing is that sometimes there are off menu items or even menu items that people haven't thought of using in a particular way. And so people who come in sometimes have very novel ideas about how to use or how to market something that we just have not heard before.
Yep.
It's pretty amazing.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks, David. And if you're still listening, we're almost an hour in, so good job. You must really care about tech transfer, and we do. And because of that, we're trying to reinvent it and improve it in different ways. We're fortunate to have a lot of great technologies to work with and great people and entrepreneurs here, but always trying to be innovative and a little bit more like our entrepreneurs. And we'll be back next week with another Tech Transfer podcast.